back to Bread and Butter, everybody. We're serving up the basics for Hearthstone improvement in episode 101. And as always, I am Doc McButt, joined by my co-host Tito. Tito, how are you doing today?
Doc, I'm doing fantastic. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty good. And listeners, we have a very special new guest, Drimsdale. How are you?
Not too bad. I was going to say it's a nice, warm, sunny day, 24 degrees in New Zealand.
Oh, it's like 24 degrees where I am too, but it's cold.
It's a different degrees.
Yeah. I mean, it's 33 degrees Fahrenheit for me. But it'll get into the 20s here in a little bit. So, Drimsdale, what have you been doing inside of Hearthstone?
So I actually, in one of my rare sort of legend-making things, pulled that off in the last day of last month. The Vicious Syndicate report said Swarm Shaman was good, and I've been bouncing off the bottom of Diamond 5, and I thought I'll pick this up and try it, and then it was a surprising run of wins and then Legend. So lately I've been doing Starship Hunter, taking down Control Warrior. They gained 95 armor, and I blew up my Starship, and it got them, and I was just like, I'm going to play this more.
Sidisi's been playing that a lot, pretty much exclusively, I think, since the start, and he's the Hunter main as far as I'm concerned, so pretty good.
I mean, thinking about getting back into Battlegrounds as well. Haven't played that for a while, but it looks kind of interesting right now.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. BG's isn't such a fun spot right now. Tito, what have you been doing inside of Hearthstone?
I have played some BGs. I actually was playing. I still do the duos with Pilot, and we're going to continue to do that. We actually broke 6,000 last season, so good for us on that. I didn't make 5,000 on standard Battlegrounds because I just didn't play enough. So I tried to get an early start here. Quillbore are still good. Quillbore are very good. They're different. You gotta play them a little different, but they're just fun. There seems to be a lot more APM style of play right now, and it's been fun. Outside of that, I haven't hit Legend this month yet. But I'm, D5, D4, D3. I've been playing for the most part Asteroid Shaman because I know the deck's not good. It's okay, but it's fun and I love it. So I played a lot. I then got a signature Gorm, I think. So the Hunter, the 12/12 Ida for 3 mana, eat the guy to the right. So I asked CDC for a list. He said he hasn't played it. He's been playing Starship. So he made me a list and it's not good. So I tried it for a little while. And then I've been climbing. I think I'm around D3. I've been playing the Discover Hunter. That's been a lot of fun. And that's fun. It's a good list. It's got some interesting ways to win. I've been doing that. But I really want to get back to Asteroid Shaman. So I'm trying to get the Legend so I get back to playing Asteroid Shaman. How about yourself, Doc?
So I've played quite a bit of BGs. I force Beetles whenever I can because I just like it a lot. Like it's good. It's not like the best thing out there. But when you get early like stat manipulation like the Beetles can do, it can like carry you through the mid game into the late game sometimes. And so that's been a lot of fun. I played a couple games of Discover Hunter before we started recording. First game was a tilter. It was into a Control Warrior. It was the first time I played into Unkiliacs with Hydration Station, so I'm glad I've dodged it this long. Did not feel good. I immediately just conceded. Like I had no way to win, so I was just like wading water in the match really. And then I queued into a Death Knight where I went turn 2 bird watching. And I was on the coin, so turn 2 bird watching, turn 3 bird watching, and then I won on 6. So maybe I coined bird watching on 1. I think that's what I did. I can look at the replay later, but I think I coined bird watching 1, bird watching on 2, and then I played. I bird watched into both of my Rengari scouts. So every time I discovered something, I got a copy. and I top decked Grifta. So I played Grifta, Rangari Scout, Coin, or Rangari Scout, Coin Rangari Scout, Grifta, and then I got 3 copies of the deal 6 damage amulet, and I had a 5/4 on board that they didn't do anything with, and they were at 22 life at that point. And so I swung at them and then just played 18 damage from hand and 1 on 6 with Discover Hunter. Not usually how that deck plays for me, but it was fun just to get a bunch of burst damage out. Yeah, Discover Hunter is still my favorite deck right now. I've been playing a little bit of Mech Rogue as well. Starting to play some Paladin. But yeah, Discover Hunter is just where I'm having the most fun playing Standard, so it's what I play most of the time.
So, Doc, what have you been doing outside of the game?
Yeah, so just playing a lot of Commander, playing a lot of Magic. It's just fun game. I've started like tweaking some of my decks that are a bit low power to make them more synergistic. And had seen some of the fruits of that labor today when I played at the shop with my buddies and the guy who sells singles at the shop. It was a lot of fun. And just being cold, it's wintertime in northern Utah. It gets pretty cold, and it's just been a very boring Doc life outside of Hearthstone time, which is very unusual, but I will absolutely take it. Drimsdale, what about yourself?
So did an escape room for a friend's birthday last night. Accidentally bypassed a couple of clues and finished it early, so that was pretty fun. This morning I was volunteering at a kids triathlon. So ages like 7 through 15, just trying to help herd 2,000 kids through the run, bike, and swim stages. I was a very small cog in a very big machine, but it was pretty fun. And apart from that,
I can't imagine. Hold on, there are 7-year-olds doing triathlons. Like, how long is this thing?
Oh, I'm not sure the exact distances involved, but it's like it's a triathlon with a Y. So they've got a swim and a bike and a run, and they do everything as if it was a full-on triathlon. But I think it's quite a lot shorter than your adult triathlons. But they seem pretty committed.
Heck yeah!
Sounds
like a lot of fun.
Yep. And the only other thing, Brandon Sanderson's latest Stormlight book came out, and so I've started reading that. It's like 1,300 pages, so it may take me a while.
Awesome. Tito, how about you?
I've accepted a job offer. I have it's going to be the job that I think I mentioned on the show a little bit. I have one more hurdle to get through, and that's not a guarantee. So, and it could take a little while. So I'm just waiting on that to drop. I'm hoping that everything's smooth sailing because I want to get moving, get paid, do the thing. Everything looks really, really good. So I'm just, knock on wood that I get through this last part and we'll be set, and then we'll start. And that might affect the show's scheduling, but we'll figure that out as we go. But outside of that, just the usual. Played Pokemon with my son today. He had a orchestra concert today as well. We did he for his first cello performance, and all the kids in the middle school. And for those that don't know, Pilot, who is on the show several times and will be again, he is a music teacher, and he does this kind of stuff. And the patience you must have to try to make middle school orchestra work and sound as good as it can, I cannot imagine. That is, that's got to be hard. So kudos to him. And, it's good for the kids. They all did really well. They all tried hard. And outside of that, just we're starting to, we have a contractor now to do the fixes to the house. We went through several that were kind of expensive, and then we found one that we really liked and came in at an actual reasonable rate. So hopefully that gets done in the next couple weeks, and I'm no longer in a room that's got insulation. I had to put some insulation up because it's cold. So I'm just hoping I get that done really soon. But Doc, I think we probably. I don't think a lot of people know who Drimsdale is. So why don't we get to know him and let our listeners get to know who he is.
Yeah, seems like a great idea. So Drimsdale how did you get started in gaming and Hearthstone in particular?
Well, dinosaur noises here. My first video game was probably Lemonade on an Apple II Plus or something like that in the very early 80s. That's where it started. Hasn't really stopped since then. Yeah, your green screen, your text entry, all the rest of it. Hearthstone, I was playing other Blizzard games, and so when it came out, I was like, I'll give this a go. I'd played a bit of Magic in the past, and it seemed related. So, yeah.
Heck yeah. So how did you get to know friend of the show, Blister Guy?
So, again, back to the Magic. So, we both played Magic the Gathering in New Zealand in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s. We lived in different parts of the country, but it's not what you call a big country, and we both played at nationals and did judging, so we met up quite a lot. But he did rather better than me on the playing side. I enjoyed it, but I wasn't that good.
Awesome. So we don't really ask a lot of guess this question, but I do like this question because it's just an extra insight on our guests. What do you do for a living?
I am a scientist in the dairy industry here. Not where I thought I'd end up because my degrees are in computer science, but it's a really good place to work and I enjoy it.
So the job I'm about to get, my title would be scientist, and I like that. But so I have to ask you this: how tired are you of cow and milk puns?
Not overly. We like I've been in my current job for about 12 years, so that the humor there has sort of died down a bit, I guess.
Fair enough. I just can't imagine. We've had I've worked at places that companies have like jokes about them, and they never get old. So I don't know. I just figured that people would utterly be giving you jokes all the time, but you got to milk it for all it's worth, I suppose.
Yep. Yep.
So we brought you on today to talk about giving and getting feedback. How did you find yourself invested in that kind of a topic?
So I'm heavily involved in the culture and environment of the R&D team that I work in, and how we handle feedback is a really important component of that. So yeah, I've run workshops on that for the group this year, some months ago, but I sort of dredged my memory for stuff to talk about.
Yeah, I think I remember that Blister Guy mentioned something about that on the show, or maybe it was in the Discord, and I was like, oh, that would be really interesting, because we talk about getting feedback and like submitting your replays all the time and working with feedback, but that's not necessarily a skill everybody has. So I'm very excited for this, and I'm glad you were able to come on for this.
Yeah, and I think that was when Blister Guy was actually getting us to send in replays for him to do commentary on.
Yeah, I think you and I did it, right? You and I were the only ones that submitted.
Yep. And we might touch on why that might be later as well, I think.
Ooh, that'll be fun. What's your favorite class and your favorite deck of all time?
Well, the first time I got Legend was just after New Zealand lockdown for COVID, and that was when Aggro Demon Hunter had just come out. So I picked up a list of that and then just didn't stop winning because it was far too good. But if you go by most wins, it'll be Druid just ahead of Mage. My favorite deck, I couldn't pick a deck of all time. My favorite deck right now is in Wild. I've got a Renathal deck with all 4 Renos in it. And
that's awesome.
It's a blast to play.
Wait, I'm trying to think. There's 4 Renos?
4 Renos.
There's the mage one, there's the original one, there's the one that we just killed. What's the 4th one?
There's 2 mage ones. The Amazing Reno and the Relicologist.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about the Relicologist because he's fair. So that's...
Yeah, one of these things is not like the others.
So when you're not playing Hearthstone, what games do you find yourself playing?
So at the moment, I'm partway through the DLC for Alan Wake 2, and also partway through Life is Strange Double Exposure, and I've just started Dragon Age Veilguard, and I have an enormous backlog of stuff that I intend to try and play over the Christmas break. I think we have a slightly longer Christmas break than you tend to. I'm probably taking most of January off, so...
Oh, awesome.
I have save up a bit of annual leave and just take a chunk of January straight after the Christmas break. So I'll have time, probably, to do some.
Now, are you familiar with the podcast Squelch? Because like the games you're playing right here kind of fit very well with they've kind of switched formats. It used to be a Hearthstone format. Now they're doing games, and they just reviewed Life is Strange. And I know Dan's a big fan of Dragon Age, even though I'm not sure he's going to play the Veilguard. But if you haven't listened to them, you might enjoy that show.
I actually listened to them for the first time this morning, so
heck yeah,
timing.
Wow,
that was on Mass Effect.
Yes.
I started their Mass Effect episode. I'm only a little bit in.
Oh, fair enough.
It's pretty good, and for anyone who's listening to this who's never played Mass Effect, give it a try. I'm not on Squelch, obviously, but Mass Effect is one of my favorite franchises of all time, and I think the storytelling is incredible. So have you ever thought about getting into like making any kind of like Hearthstone content or anything like that?
No, it never actually crossed my mind until you asked the question just now. I hadn't even thought about it.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I got plenty on my plate.
Yeah. So where'd you get your username from?
So that is the name of a supporting character in a kid's book by a Canadian author called Gordon Corman. I chose it because I figured it wouldn't be taken most places, and that's turned out to be true so far.
See, I wasn't sure if it was a take on the character from the Scarlet Letter, and just a slight change. Drimsdale, I believe. So that's kind of where I thought it was going.
Oh, this was Elmer Drimsdale in the Bruno and Boots books.
I
was reading them to my son a few years back. And it's like, oh, yep, this will do.
Heck yeah. So what is something that our listeners would find surprising to know about you?
How about I did Pony Club as a teenager, and one time in a one-day event in the cross-country part, my horse stopped to drink from the water jump.
No.
That's
so
fairly embarrassing.
Is Pony Club like I take it like equestrian
yeah,
jumping and all that?
Yep, for ages up through teenage. And then beyond that, you just get into sort of professional riding type stuff, I guess.
Oh, fair enough. Do you still ride?
Pretty cool.
Do you still ride horses?
I don't. I stopped in late high school because it was fighting with time for studying for exams, and it kind of had to be exams.
Yeah.
You had to put the cart before the horse, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm expecting I'm going to get some feedback about my jokes later. But today's main topic is getting and giving feedback. As I mentioned earlier, often we are trying to suggest that if you're trying to get better at Hearthstone, it's good to reach out into like Discord. Discord is probably the best place, but you can do Reddit, you can do Twitter, or you can do Blue Sky, or whatever you want to do, and you can usually get feedback from a community. And a lot of times in our communities, like you can share replays, or you can say, "Hey, what should I have mulligan here for?" Or, "Hey, on this particular decision, what you guys would have done," and all that. But getting and giving feedback isn't that easy, right? So sometimes you have a hard time accepting the feedback you give or whatever, and sometimes it's hard to give appropriate feedback that maybe won't hurt someone's feelings, or maybe won't be construed the right way. So, Drimsdale, why do you think feedback is crucial for improving gaming, as particularly in something like a strategy game like Hearthstone?
Yeah, I think without feedback, it's really hard to grow as a player and to know what you're doing right and wrong. And so I guess this is where I'd point back to what Blister Guy did, where he was commentating our replays. I don't know if you remember when he did mine, I had completely messed it up right at the start with the mulligan. Like, everything from thereafter was just, this is really awkward now. So that was really handy for me. It set me wrong for the whole game, but I would never have known if Blister Guy hadn't been commentating. So, yeah, some people might be able to watch their own replays and see what they did wrong, but I think that's a little bit dangerous. I think there's a risk you just make the same mistakes again and think it was fine.
Right, because you're looking at the replay and you're still using the same line of thinking most of the time, right? You're like, well, what did I do wrong? And it's like, it's hard to necessarily look at it from a different angle. You can try, and sometimes you can be successful, but like if you're not thinking about, like you just said, the mulligan, like maybe you go to look at your replay and you just say, okay, I mulligan, this is how I mulligan, here's turn 1, here's turn 2. You might not even realize you made mistakes in the mulligan. So that makes a lot of sense. So we talked a little bit about how sometimes criticism can be like critical. How do you think what makes feedback constructive versus just being critical?
All right. So I'm going to go a little bit broader with this one. Because this sort of touches on some of the stuff that I did in those workshops. And when I was doing research for that, one of the things I read about was how Pixar, when they're making movies, how they handled feedback there. They had this thing they called the brain trust, and each aspiring movie maker presents their proposal to this collection of directors and producers and gets it critiqued. And you'd think this would be this whole sort of Shark Tank atmosphere that you'd dread taking your movie in there to be shredded. But actually people came out of that, like people were hyped to go in, they came out of it energized, and that was because of the way they were doing this. So they had this atmosphere of psychological safety, and they had these 3 pillars of feedback that I got from the description. And so one is that feedback needs to be constructive, that it has to help the recipient grow. And that doesn't mean only improvement feedback. So positive feedback can reinforce your good behaviors and build confidence. So you can have constructive feedback that is actually positive, or you can have improvement feedback, or it can be combined, but it's always constructive. But also it needs to be candid. You need to be able to be honest with the recipient about what they're doing that could be improved. But also it needs to be compassionate. So these brain trust people knew how the presenters felt because they'd been them in the past. So they had empathy for them, they had understanding, and every aspect of the movies that deserved praise got it. So it wasn't just, here are the bad bits. It was, here is what you're doing well, here is where you can improve. And there's no sort of, well, they should know how good they are, so I don't need to say it. You tell people. So those 3 pillars, constructive, candid, compassionate, is, I think, how I would answer your question, if that has answered your question.
I think so. So like constructive, so let's take an example of like what we were just talking about with Blister Guy doing a review, right, or whatever. And it's like constructive would be we could have made better decisions in the mulligan, and then would that be and then you could also have some positives where it's like, I like the move that you made here, I like your decision here, to like kind of reinforce that, hey, we're not just talking about your mistakes, but we're also talking about the things that you're doing right, the things that you're doing well.
Yeah, and the mulligan set me wrong, but some of the plays I made after that for the situation I was in were fine. And I mean, so for me, that sort of ties back when I was in university in the early years. There was an American guy who was a rated chess player over there, and I played against him a few times. He said my mid-game was fine, my improvisation in the mid-game, but I hadn't learned the opening moves. And this is the same sort of situation for me. I need to sit down and learn how the mulligan works for the decks I play, instead of just sort of throwing myself at it and seeing what happens.
Yeah, and it, I personally, I used to really rely heavily on mulligan stats. Like anytime the game would come up, I would look at my stats and be, all right, I should mulligan for this and this and this. And now I do look at that occasionally, especially if I'm playing a new deck and like the first time, I'm like, okay, how should I mulligan for this against Rogue? But I've really taken the mulligan to be one of those things where I kind of have to make decisions more than just what the stats tell me. So I've kind of turned off the targeting computer, And now when I mulligan, I'm like, okay, well, what's my game plan here? What do I have in my hand? What am I trying to accomplish? And what are my turns 1, 2, and 3 going to look like, or what do I want them to look like? And I really kind of try to apply that. And that's come from criticism about how I mulligan in the past. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So now, when we're asking you for feedback, like not everybody has the background on giving good feedback or has those pillars in mind. And getting feedback can be something scary and can be something, almost deflating at times. But how do you figure, if you're looking for feedback, how do you filter on the value of feedback, especially like in these online communities where we're kind of interacting with somewhat strangers, some friends, whatever, but like, how do you figure out which feedback is valuable and which is not?
Yeah, I think to some extent it's about trust. Like I'm not in a lot of online Hearthstone communities, but say Blister Guy's Discord is one where I would feel safe asking for feedback. Blister Guy runs a fairly tight ship as far as being considerate of people is concerned, and so asking there, I would feel safe that you wouldn't have someone just sort of rock up and say nasty things because I did something really stupid, because I could do something really stupid. Let's not rule that out. But the way they would explain it to me would be kinder there.
That's fair. Now, but what if, aside from being maybe like harsh feedback versus, friendly feedback, what about finding the valuable feedback? Like somebody just saying, hey, I would have done this instead of that, versus somebody's like, oh, well, your entire approach is probably wrong. Maybe you should have changed something in the mulligan, or maybe you should have had a better plan or thought ahead on these. Is there a good way to, or do you just kind of have to kind of take it all and see what works?
I guess it depends on, like, if you don't know enough to know which feedback is good or bad, then it comes back to who you trust. And I guess if you do know enough to be discriminating about the feedback you're taking on, then you're already a step along the way to knowing which of that feedback could be good or bad. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question that you're asking.
No, that's fair. It's kind of a vague question. It's just, I know that you can get a lot of different opinions, and it's like sometimes it's hard to figure out which opinions are good, and sometimes you get good advice, but it's hard to follow completely, because if you're getting, like, say, sometimes we get some advice from people like World 8 or somebody that's really Donkey, or somebody that's really good at the game, better than me, and they might think, oh, you should have been thinking about this, but they've also kind of missed the level between where I am and where they are. So they're already thinking about other things, and they're past that, and they're not realizing that I don't even have that middle part versus what they're trying to share with us. So I think that's also too, is when you're giving feedback, you probably need to think kind of like who you're giving feedback to, and kind of like where they might be in their journey in the game or something, or whatever it might be, and kind of try to factor that into your evaluation of how to give them that feedback.
Yeah, and I think it can come down to communication styles as well. In that, like, so for work, we've done some of the personality tests so that people know where they are, and like introvert, extrovert, that kind of thing. And one of them is around top down versus bottom up thinking. I tend towards the top down, but there are people at work that tend more towards the bottom up. And when we didn't realize that, we could really struggle to communicate, to like teach each other concepts and things like that, because if I start from the big picture, they need the detail, and they try and teach something to me from a detailed example, and I don't have the vision, the bigger picture to understand it. So, it can be to some extent, I think, about how you present that feedback as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So this next question, I'm as I'm reading it, it kind of brings me back to, have you said you played Blizzard games, so I'm assuming you've played World of Warcraft?
I have.
Okay. So, the question is, how do you balance giving honest feedback while maintaining a positive relationship with teammates or opponents? What this makes me think of is, so I ran a guild for a long time. I ran a raiding guild for a long time, and I ran raids. And even when I wasn't running the raids, I was still in charge of the guild. And when people are parsing gray or not doing so well, and they're part of the team, you want them to still be part of the team, but you also want them to self-evaluate and also want to help them get better. So you can kind of see what they're doing. And like I used to struggle finding ways to motivate and to give feedback to people that are kind of at the bottom, because they probably know they're at the bottom. They probably already feel bad about that. I know I do when I was kind of, parsing poorly or whatnot. But we would try many different things like, hey, why don't you spend some time with this other person who's a really good at that class? And maybe you can figure out like, hey, how you can maybe increase your DPS a little bit, or maybe find a way to stop running out of mana when you're healing or something like that. But it was always like a tightrope where you had to, because you don't want to offend people. You don't like, this is not a job. This is a game. And while you need them as part of your team to improve, you also don't want to isolate them or make them feel bad or whatever. So it's always kind of like a tightrope there. So how do you kind of give honest feedback while maintaining kind of like that positive relationship and like for your team or for whoever you're working with?
Yeah. So, and in the workshops, we talked a little bit about this sort of thing as well, how things can go wrong with giving feedback. Not the only ways, but we had some starting points. In each workshop, we went in completely different directions as people shared their experiences. But to reference those pillars again, so you can end up, if you're too candid, then you get the sort of thing that you were just talking about, where people get upset or defensive or hurt. But if you're too compassionate, if you're not telling people the things they need to know, they just think everything is fine and they never improve. So the balance there is, I think, found by thinking about the individual, because so much about how feedback needs to be delivered depends on the individual that you're delivering it to. Some people like to be told things straight up. Other people need a much gentler hand when you're delivering that feedback. And so I think the key question is, what's your goal? Because you're thinking, okay, I want these people to improve. It's not to upset or hurt them. It's not to just make them feel happy. It's to help them you will help them to be happy by helping them do better so they can feel better about themselves in the game. I used a mathematical metaphor when I was describing it in the workshops. If you think of it like an equation with some constants that you can't change, and that's like the personality traits of the recipient, and some you can, which is the content of your feedback and the manner in which you deliver it, and you're trying to make the result of that, like what you're trying to make happen with that is your goal. So there's things you can't change, you have to work around, and that's the person. And so I guess one really key thing is knowing who you're delivering feedback to and how they're going to handle it.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, just thinking about that too, is because trying to help those people come, and this is not Hearthstone, this is Warcraft, but like not only did you're trying to help those people be better in-game versions of themselves, for lack of a better kind of thing there, but also it's affecting the entire team. So other teammates were getting upset because this other person was kind of maybe not executing the mechanics right, or not doing enough to do that. So it's always kind of an interesting balance. You also have to give, that makes a lot of sense, because you have to give feedback in a way that they handle, but you also have to give feedback to those people that are also trying to do better, but they're waiting on feedback. I don't know. I'm kind of losing the thread here a little bit, but yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Each person's different. You can't use the same approach for everybody. And I've also noticed that when we're doing replay reviews, like Coin Concede has a channel dedicated to that. And some people will post a replay and they'll be like, hey, what can I do wrong? And then like, what did I do wrong? And some people will start giving them like, oh, well, you probably should have done this. You probably should have done that. And they get instantly defensive. Like, no, I made that decision because of this. I made that decision because of that. Like, so if somebody isn't receptive to feedback, even if they're asking for it, what's a good way to handle that?
Right. So we did talk a little bit about that as well. And so people, I tried to call it improvement feedback rather than constructive feedback because, it has those connotations to it. But the people who refuse to accept that they've made mistakes, and I think at some level this could be because they're confusing actions and identity, if that makes sense. Like, making mistakes and misunderstanding lines of play actually threaten their identity as a good player. I'm a good player. If I make a mistake or I'm following a bad line, then that would make me a bad player. So I'll try and rationalize why this was actually the right thing to do. Yeah. But also, like in terms of how things can go wrong with receiving feedback, there's also the complete other end of things, people who struggle with positive feedback. So deflection, denial, that kind of thing. And so, I mean, that's kind of me. I'm the kind of person who's got up on stage, gave a presentation, and then afterwards someone said, "You did a great job." And I said, "Well, actually, I forgot to say this bit. I stumbled talking about this, but I didn't answer that question well at all." So this is not hypothetical. This is something I did and should not do. Don't do this. When you do it, you're invalidating the beliefs and the decisions of the person giving you the feedback. So, yeah, it's there's two ways that, well, at least two ways that receiving feedback can go wrong, but both of them are basically denial. How to get around that? At least for the sort of the imposter syndrome is a hell of a drug case. One thing you can do, and this might work for the other sort as well, and I hadn't really thought about that until now, is making sure the feedback's really specific. Like, you played well can be brushed off, but when you traded here, instead of going face, it was a brilliant play because this happened and then this happened. It's a lot harder for them to deny. It's like, yeah, you definitely did that. That was good. Like, accept that. And maybe that works for the other way as well. Like, yeah, you made some good plays, but in this one, because you did this particular thing, this thing happened downstream, and that's what cost you the game eventually. I mean, there's going to come a point at which point you can't penetrate their sort of impenetrable ego defense, but maybe for people who are not quite that so far down the road, just being really detailed in your description of what they did and why it could be improved on, let's say, because it might not necessarily be wrong so much as less right. I've read quite a lot of Magic articles from back in the day where there are like 10 plays you could make which are varying degrees of rightness, and one gives you that 0.2% edge or something, and the big name pro players will see that line and they'll see the other 6 or 8 or whatever and tell you exactly why you shouldn't do each of them. So
no, that does make a lot of sense. And to your point, like when you say, "Oh, someone gives you some positive criticism," and you're like, "Oh yeah, I forgot to say this point, and I got to play this point." Those are probably all still things you should keep in mind and all that. But yet, in the effort of getting the criticism or the positive criticism or praise or whatever you want to call it, you should be more like, they're not trying to dredge out the problems that they didn't know about. They're trying to reinforce that. And I liked what you said about kind of giving specific things. I kind of do this when I add people in Hearthstone. One of my favorite things to do is, whether I win or lose, if I played a good game or if we've played a good game and it was like really interesting back and forth, I will add somebody because I want to get over that stigma of adding somebody is just going to be salty. Someone's salty at you. So especially after I've lost, I like adding people like, "Oh, I thought I had you, and then you did this move, and you did this move, and I was really interesting, and I wasn't even expecting that," and all that. So, and that's worked out pretty well for me. Just making new friends, as we say in Hearthstone. But that's all very interesting. I think the next question here. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say one more point. When I ran this workshop at work, we had someone say a thing that I'd learned when facing straight up denial was to say, "Okay, so what if you concede I might be 1% right? Not 50%, not 20%, just 1%. How would that change your thinking?" And let them consider, if there's a little bit of wiggle room there, and then sometimes that gets you where you want to go. Sometimes it might not, but it's just another way of trying to get through to someone.
And I think this is something that, obviously you're talking about work. This happens in the work environment all the time.
Yeah.
It's like you get somebody that thinks they're right, and it's like, well, you're not thinking about the team. You're not thinking about maybe the project or whatever. And it's like, you're not necessarily right. And it's that stubbornness that kind of, I can be a stubborn person, but I also try to get back feedback. So, So I think this next question goes along with what I was trying to articulate about the WoW team earlier. If you like you're a team leader or perhaps or just maybe officially or unofficially kind of head of a team, how can feedback foster better collaboration? How can you do that to get better collaboration rather than creating friction, not fiction?
So I think that might be putting the cart before the horse to a certain extent. The first thing you need to do, in my opinion anyway, is to create a psychologically safe environment for the team. Once you have that, collaborative feedback should just follow naturally, and people feel able to give and receive feedback knowing that everyone's on the same team, it has the same goals. So that first step is to make sure that you are a team, that you all agree on what you're trying to achieve, and you have that safe environment. And I've talked about psychological safety a couple of times, but maybe I should do a definition or something for that. So one quote I found was that it's a shared belief held by members of a team that it's okay to take risks, to express their ideas and concerns, and to speak up with questions and to admit mistakes, all without fear of negative consequences. If you've got that, then people will feel comfortable giving each other feedback because they know it's like if someone gives you improvement feedback, it's with your best interest in mind. They just want what's good for the team and good for you. So I think step one is that environment. If you have that, everything else just flows naturally.
And sometimes you have to kind of check your ego at the door too, right? Because even if someone's giving you that advice, like, hey, you should do X or Y and it's going to help you, it kind of feels bad that you were doing that wrong in the first place. And you have to kind of get over that, right?
Oh yeah. Like what's the phrase? Growth mindset. You have to be able to think, if I'm doing something wrong and someone tells me, that's awesome because now I can do better.
One other thing too is just because someone's giving you advice, it might not be right. And it might not be right for you, but it's still worth considering. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of important too. Because I'm sure there's somebody that's on, like, go back to WoW, someone would be like, oh, you should be doing this, this, and this. And it could be completely wrong. It's not your play style. It's not this. But, it's still worth listening to. And it's still like, hey, that's something that's valid. It's just not valid for me. And it lets you think. Another thing too, I think that if you want to get advice on what you're working on, be specific, ask for the specific advice you're looking for. Because if you just send somebody a replay and say Hearthstone, and you're going to get all kinds of advice, right? You'll be like, hey, your mulligan was wrong. You did this, the other. But you can say, I'm really specifically looking for what went wrong on turn 7. And people might say, well, actually, what really went wrong was turn 5. That's why turn 7 went horribly. But I think if you don't want just general advice, be very specific of what you're asking for, and you might get, better advice there or feedback.
Yeah. And I mean, actively seeking feedback is awesome and people should do it. Yes. And take it on board when they get it as well. So yeah, if you ask, you probably will receive, and just be prepared to receive it properly. Which might be making sure you've got that growth mindset. And it might be, like we were saying before, about when you're getting that positive feedback, don't deflect it or deny it. Just say thank you and move on. If you disagree with it, that's fine. Don't disagree to the person's face or text, as it were. Just go away and think about why they might have that perspective on you that you don't.
That's fair. Do you think is there anything we haven't touched on you think is important about feedback, and maybe especially as it relates to Hearthstone?
So I think, well, if I go through what I think the key points are, we've talked about psychological safety. We've talked about those 3 C's, the 3 pillars: constructive, candid, compassionate, and about knowing the person. And yeah, we've talked about. Yeah, so I had a note here that if the feedback feels better than you deserve, maybe some self-reflection is in order, and you can do that in your own time after you've said thank you. But I feel like there was one other thing I did think might be worth touching on, and that's about the communication mediums that we use. So in person, obviously the best. you've got the most sort of bandwidth for perceiving what the other person's trying to communicate to you. Something like a video call. So we talked about this in the early days of COVID at work. A video call, I think the psychologist said, was about 70% of the information gets through. Audio, you're talking maybe 40%, and plain text, 10%. Plain text is terrible for nuance. And so one of the things we've been talking, if you're going to communicate via plain text, you need to make sure that your meaning is being conveyed really clearly. And I think that's really important when it comes to feedback as well. Because we talked before about what happens if you only talk about the bad things. And there are lots of ways around that. Like sometimes it just involves more text. Sometimes it's emojis. Just, letting people know what you're feeling as well as what you're saying. I think that's quite important.
Yeah, is there anything to, as far as your workshops and what you've learned, is there anything to kind of like the concept of sandwiching the negative, like positive, give something positive, give something negative, give something positive? Is that something that is ideal, or is that just kind of...
That falls back into depends on the person, I think, because we had a bit of a discussion about that. And for some people who are, and I'm not using the word sensitive as a pejorative, but people who are more sort of emotion-oriented, sensitive in that way, they need those layers of, what would you call it, cushioning maybe? They need to be reassured to some extent, but there are people who find that to be just pointless stuff that's getting in the way of the good information, and they want you to just rip the Band-Aid off and say it. So I think, yes, that can be an important structure, but also it's still about the individual to an extent.
That's fair. Doc, do you have any feedback, or would you like to give any feedback for this feedback conversation?
I mean, no, it's been very, I mean, I guess kind of, it's been very enlightening thinking about it this way. I've never heard of the 3C pillars, so that's definitely like something I'm going to take into consideration whenever like I am in a position to give someone types of feedback, because I definitely think that's like a very, very good formula to follow.
And whenever I'm trying to give Doc a little more feedback about Hidden Legend, I probably need to be a little bit more compassionate, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a little more constructive. Well, Doc, as far as feedback, I think we need a little bit more feedback from our guests. What do you think?
Yeah, dessert sounds good, Tito. So what is your favorite dessert?
Well, that's an interesting one. I'd probably say a caramel mud cake, or any of a variety of cheesecakes. A bunch of different toppings. I don't really mind, but yeah, one of those.
That caramel cake sounds real good.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. There's a place just down the road that does it, and yeah, we've been there a few times.
Awesome. That's very cool. So listeners, please leave us a review. It helps us know how we're doing, good, bad, the ugly. We prefer a 5-star review because it helps with visibility, but please give us what you feel like we deserve.
And please use the 3 C's when you're giving us that feedback.
Absolutely. And if you leave us a review, we'll read it out on the show. Drimsdale, where can people find you on social media?
I'm not super active on either Blue Sky or the platform formerly known as Twitter, but I'm Drimsdale on both of those, and Drimsdale on Discord as well.
Awesome. How about yourself, Tito?
You can find me on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, and Blue Sky at Tito Santana HS. Doc, how about yourself?
You can find me on Discord and Blue Sky at Doc McButt.
And
so Drimsdale, do you have anyone or anything you want to shout out or promote?
Well, let's just shout out Blister Guy and Walk to Work again. 3 episodes a week, over 1,000 episodes there, and I like hearing like live games and understanding the lines of play. I think it's well worth listening to.
How about yourself, Doc?
Yeah, Drimsdale, thank you so much for coming on the show, taking time out of your day to talk with us. And it's not super often we get someone with like practical, like real life. Now I'm losing the word, but I guess real life experience with the very specific, like with the specific topic we're doing, because a lot of the time our topics are just game theory. So the fact that you had like been part of now I'm forgetting the word again, different word, but part of the classes or whatever about getting and giving feedback. It's very cool. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I am,
so to be clear, sorry, I'm not a psychologist or anything like that. I'm just an interested amateur.
And that's fair, but I mean, even the things we talked about, you can think about in game, you can think about in other games, you can think about even in your work environment. So, obviously he's not a doctor, but he's given some good advice. I didn't get to read this last week because I forgot, but Jay from This Week in Hearthstone, as you guys know, wanted me to read this on episode 100, so we're going to read it now. He says, tenacity, perseverance, strength of will, and firmness of purpose. The bread and butter Hearthstone picked up the gauntlet when others put it down. Congratulations on the milestone. The guests have been great. The topics have been insightful. And the hosts are the greatest. 100 episodes is in the can. I cannot wait to hear who you have on for episode 200. I know a guy if you need ideas. So thank you for that, Jay. I also like to thank anybody who happens to have us in their Spotify Wrapped. That's really cool. Just that some people are mentioning us, and it's just really nice. And thanks to everybody that's just help support us and get us here. Looking forward to these next million episodes, and we'll keep on going. But I think we're toast, guys. I'll see you.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Slide two brothers meet one another when they slide up to the mic. It's bread and butter with one another. Let's start up that recording light.